everybody! It's Stephanie from Sunnyside Daycare. I'm the director and preschool educator. I've been an educator for over 10 years, and I am here today with our second ever live broadcast on the Sunnyside Daycare Facebook page. So today we are talking about external factors of behavior that can influence external factors that can influence a child's behavior. So I'm going to just talk a little bit before I get into the actual details about it, let people arrive if they're not here already, and right at the end I will take some questions if anyone has any. There's a big delay, so if I look silly while I'm waiting for your questions, I'll probably just be like jiggling around, maybe petting my cat. We have a special visitor today. My cat, she's sleeping in this basket. Oops, snoring. So before I begin, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask, why are you here today? Are you here because you want a happier, less stressed life with your kids, with your family? Or are you here because you are hoping for tips on having perfectly obedient kids who listen to everything you say? I hope it's the first one. I hope you're here because you want to be happier and stress-free with your kids. Because what we're going to talk about, everything we're going to talk about isn't about obedience necessarily. It's about working with your kids. Helping your kids in their struggles as they learn about their emotions, their feelings, and everything. So, the next thing I want to say before I start is this is not going to be easy. Nothing in parenting has ever been super easy, right? But gentle parenting is another level because it takes a lot of patience. It also takes a lot of reflection on your part. It takes a lot of looking at yourself, your environment, your children's needs to see what can be improved to make it easier on everybody. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the external factors of behavior, like I said. So what kind of things can influence your kids that we can possibly control? We're the adults here, right? We are the grown-ups, which means that it's our responsibility to make the life easier for everybody. It's our responsibility to make sure that the kids' basic needs are being met. And we need to do that before we can actually talk about parenting techniques and advice, because nothing that I can possibly tell you is going to help if your child has needs that are yet to be met. If your child, for instance, is hungry, which is one of the basic things we'll get into. Now, like I said, we're doing this because any of the strategies on parenting I can give you, any of the techniques for talking to kids, it's going to be pointless if your child is having a breakdown because they're just really, really tired. So, I have some notes here, okay? I'm going to look at it because I tried to be very clear and write down a lot of stuff. So again, I already went through a little bit of why I chose to start with this, but basically this is the setup. This is how we are sure that the techniques we're going to learn and talk about later on are going to be effective. So, basic needs, because that is the number one thing we need to look at when we're wondering if a child needs to work on a certain behavior or if there's something leading to it. Basically, have you ever worked with a coworker who comes in hangry if they don't get lunch on time? Or if they haven't eaten breakfast? Well, that's kids for you. I'm sure you've all seen it. If your child is hungry or tired, listen, you could say the most magical words ever, but it's not going to help them. It's not going to help them cool down, no matter what, if they're hangry. So, hungry, tired. Since we're the adults, like I said, it's our job to make sure the environment, the routine, everything works for our kids, works for our family. It's also our job to read our children's cues, especially when they're nonverbal, especially if they can't yet communicate for themselves. So what does that mean? What does that look like? It means knowing that your child starts twirling their hair when they're really overtired. And probably, no matter how nicely you ask or how much you try to coax them, they're not going to get their shoes on by themselves if they're twirling their hair and falling asleep. At that point, you know, getting angry isn't necessarily going to help. So again, before we work on behaviors, before we try to support kids' emotions and anything, we 100% need to ensure that their basic needs are being met. You know, there are other basic needs that are considered, other needs that are considered basic. You know, are they looking for attention? Are they looking for connection? Things like that. But we will get there in future live discussions. Today, I just really wanted to talk about the real primal basic needs of food and sleep. So, again, whenever your child is struggling with a behavior, that's the first thing you need to do. Are they hungry? Are they tired? And sometimes just doing something as simple as working in a snack into your routine can change the whole tone of the day. If you know that, I'm pretty sure I gave this example before, but it's something that comes up often. If you know that your child breaks down in the car every time you get home and maybe cries until dinner or just really argues with you until dinner, give them a snack. If you know that your child really, really struggles going to the store at 12:30, maybe you should go at 11 and let them go to sleep at 12 because they're exhausted. So again, basic needs, it's our responsibility to make sure that those are fulfilled for our kids. Especially, like I said, for the kids who aren't verbal, because they can't tell you necessarily, oh, I'm really tired, I need to stop now. And on top of being tired and hungry, another basic need that you should think of is, are they sick or are they in pain or are they uncomfortable physically? Maybe every day you struggle getting out the door because your kids doesn't want to put on their socks. Well, a 2-year-old might not be able to say the seam in the socks drives me crazy. So we need to look at everything we're doing with the kids, and we really need to try and figure these things out for them. We need to read those cues. So again, the first thing we need to rule out when we're dealing with the kids' behavior is the basic needs that they have, and are they being fulfilled. So the next part I want to talk about is the routine in your life. Basically, what does your routine look like? I really suggest keeping a notebook or a journal or a log of the behaviors that you're struggling with or your child is struggling with, as well as when they happen in the day. Because when you start to reflect on your routine and you start to notice that kids are having certain difficulties at the same time or the same part of your routine, you can then make changes to help your children succeed in those routines. You know, let's say, I'm going to give a lot of examples today because we're really talking about ruling things out. So let's say when you get home from work, I used this example before, the kids are really hungry. And the routine is tiny little snack at 4:30, let's say after they get home from school or daycare, play for a bit, homework, whatever, and then dinner at 7. Well, if your child is still cranky from 4:30 to 7, or you find they're still hungry after their 4 o'clock snack, maybe it's time to redo the whole routine. And something that a lot of parents have started doing that I've been reading about on Facebook and stuff is actually serving dinner to their kids at 4:30. And at 7 o'clock when the adults eat, giving them a little snack. Because people are starting to realize that the routine they have for themselves as adults or teenagers or anything are not necessarily adequate for the kids. So examine your routines. I urge you to keep a notebook, write things down. You know, it doesn't have to be long. You don't have to write a whole 17-page journal on why you think things are happening. Just, hey, child cried for 10 minutes when I asked her to put on her pajamas. And you see that same struggle every single day. You'll know there's a problem there. Now, today I can't tell you exactly how to change your routines around, but I can help you examine them. So, like I said, it's a bit hard to reflect on our routines and on what we're doing because it gets personal, especially if you have, let's say, 2 children and your routine's going great, and when a 3rd child comes around, you can't get into that same flow, that same rhythm, sometimes it's really hard to examine everything and flip it upside down. But that's what I'm telling you that you might need to do. Even though it's been working for one child, two child, or 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, sometimes you need to just ask yourself if there are changes to be made. So, for instance, if your child struggles every day at bedtime, they don't want to put on their pajamas. Well, maybe you can just put on their pajamas when they get home, or take a bath when they get home, and take that out of the equation. Or maybe, oh, my cat's making a lot of noise back there. Maybe you can have them brush their teeth and then put on their pajamas, whereas before they might have been putting on their pajamas and then brushing their teeth. So really just look at everything that's happening, try to keep notes, and ask yourself, where are the trends happening? Where are your kids struggling? What are the triggers for your kids? Because sometimes, just like I said, switching a routine around could be what you need just to help them out. And when I say switching their routine around, or, doing things to adapt to your children, I want to be very clear that this doesn't mean you're giving in to them. Because I know it's something that parents ask me all the time. But if they don't want to eat at 7, and I let them eat at 7:30, isn't that giving in? No, it's being flexible. And we're flexible with ourselves. Well, we should be. Flexible with our colleagues, our friends. Why not do the same for your kids? So it doesn't mean letting them do whatever they want either, but it just means realizing that they're people like we are. So asking them to sit at the table when they're not hungry, and then arguing with them, sit down, sit down, sit down. Again, nobody's happy. So being that flexible will make everyone happier. And that goes back to what I asked right at the beginning. Do you want to be happier? Do you want to be more stress-free? Or do you just want perfectly obedient children? Because those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand. And what I'm trying to help you do today is be happier. Be less stressed in your life, in your routines. So again, so far we talked about fulfilling the kids' basic needs. And now we talked about the routine. And just very briefly, when we talk about the routine, one thing to think of is it really, really overpacked? Because I think that sometimes parents forget what it's like to be so stressed. And when your child comes home from school and goes to piano lessons and swimming and then has bed and then has reading and then whatever, that's a lot. So just when you're examining your routine, make sure your kids have some time to just be. Whether that means playing Lego or cuddling on the couch or reading a story, they really need time in that routine to relax and to recoup, just like we do after a long week at work. So when you're examining your routine, try and keep track of the triggers, try and keep track of the parts of the routine that are very stressful, and try and examine where you can be a little more flexible, where you can help the kids out. And just to give you a concrete example, I was talking to a family over the weekend who were looking for some guidance in their routine, and the struggle they were having was that mom could do the routine perfectly, but the kids were hesitant to have dad help them with the routine, which is super common. It doesn't mean anything about dad or mom. It's super common. I'm sure a lot of you know kids sometimes choose a parent, and that's the only parent they want to help. So when we talked about the routine, mom and dad would split the responsibilities and stuff, but unfortunately the kids wanted mom, and it was becoming very stressful for mom. So one of the things we talked about was, can mom just go out 1 or 2 nights a week and let dad handle it on his own? Does it throw off the routine? Yes, but it's still flexible to fulfill everybody's needs. The child at that point has to listen to dad. Even if they really want mom, taking mom completely out of the equation makes it a bit easier. And mom needs a break too. Because if everyday bedtime relies on mom being there and being able to help, that's a lot of stress. And we're going to get there in the next part. So basically, when you examine your routines, be flexible, try to find the triggers, check if it's just really overpacked and stressful, because nobody's happy when they don't have time to stop. Now, the next part's going to be really tough. Why? Because I'm going to ask you to think of yourselves, question yourselves, reflect on the way that you talk to the kids, your behaviors, your moods, your attitudes. I wanted to start by saying a quote. And the quote is that an escalated adult cannot de-escalate an escalated child. Why am I saying that? Because I'm sure it's happened to all of us when you're talking to kids. You say something, they say no, or they say the opposite, and you argue. The more angry you get as an adult, or the more impatient, the harder it is going to be to help your child calm down. And I'm sure, like I said, it's happened to all of us. You start yelling, they start yelling. You can't calm them down at that point. Just like when you talk to an adult. If I'm really angry and I'm in the middle of yelling or whatever, and someone's like, calm down, that's, maybe I don't want to hear calm down, but at least it feels better. But if I'm yelling and someone's like, calm down, nobody is winning there. So, maybe not now, but in the future, again, I urge you to take a journal, just like I told you for examining your routine. And you need to keep track of your behaviors and your moods. That can go hand in hand with your routine, because if you're finding that mornings are really tough, yes, could it be because you're super rushed to get out the door? But if you hate mornings and you already wake up on the wrong side of the bed every day, you have a big part to play in this. So a lot of everything we're going to talk about until the end of this discussion is going to be about you. Because it sounds kind of mean. A lot of times when kids are acting the way they are, it's because of something we need to do to ourselves. Either calm down, be a little more flexible, be a little more respectful. I'm going all over the place. I'm going to just step back a bit and say you. So we want to talk about, first and foremost, modeling what we want to see in the kids. So like I said, you can't de-escalate a child when you're already upset and angry, but you can model what you hope to see. So if your child is getting really angry and you're getting really angry, it's okay to stop arguing. Again, it doesn't mean you're giving in. It means you're being flexible. It's okay to say, I'm super angry right now. I'm going to take a few deep breaths to cool down. And you know what? Maybe it's not so bad that you want to play for a few more minutes, if you can, right? Like, there's always going to be exceptions where you can't be flexible. But the more flexibility that you find in yourself to give your kids, the more they'll come around and understand when you're serious and you don't have that flexibility to give. So ask yourself, are you portraying what you want to see in your kids? Are you showing them the calmness you want them to approach situations with? Are you showing them how to problem solve when they get upset instead of just angrily stomp off and slam a cabinet? Also, what are your triggers? I'm calm. I talk very loud in the class, but I'm generally pretty calm with the kids in terms of how I react. But we all have our triggers, and you know what? I can't take when kids spit at me. It's so easy to go from 0 to 1 million when a child spits on me. But I've realized that's my trigger. So I know, because I've reflected on my practice, that I need to step back when that happens right away. Like, no talking to the kid and cooling them down. Like, you just spit on me, I don't like this, I'm stepping back. That goes back to modeling what I want to see, but it also means that I've evaluated where in my routines and my relationships my triggers lie. So I urge you to all keep track of when you find yourself losing control and losing patience. What is it that bothers you the most when you're dealing with your kids? When we're done the discussion, I will post a link to a page on the Janet Lansbury site. If you haven't met her, heard her, she is super terrific. She has a podcast called Unruffled, where she really talks about a lot of situations and how she approaches them from a very respectful manner. So what I'm going to post after this is a link to different ways to stay unruffled. I'm not going to talk about all those things now because, well, it's a lot, and it kind of goes out of the scope of this little conversation, but we will talk about it in the future. But I definitely think everyone else should check it out since we are on the topic of yourself and your own triggers, your own behaviors. Um, one thing I really want to talk about while we're talking about yourself is self-care. It comes up a lot. It's kind of like the new fad right now saying self-care, self-care, but it's important. I'm not saying you have to drink a bottle of wine every night. Please, probably you shouldn't do that. But if you need to step out of the house and get a massage and leave your kids with babysitter, do it, please. Because this goes down this goes back to your basic needs. Just like we have to evaluate the needs of the kids. Are they hungry? Are they tired? We have to look at ourselves. Um, and don't be afraid to ask for help in that same sense. Because if you've reached your limit and you find yourself super stressed every single day, again, nobody's happy. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to leave your kids with babysitter. It's okay to just tell your partner, like, I need a few hours, I'm going out. Um, because again, a lot of the behaviors we see in kids probably could be a little softened a bit by how we react to them. And I'm sure you've all seen that when you are with your kids. Um, Along the topic of yourself, something really important to think about when we're dealing with kids is, are your expectations realistic? Because honestly, I see a lot of parents who say things like, my 3-year-old won't sit at the table while we have dinner for an hour. Well, you know what? 3-year-olds can't sit for an hour. So it's really, really important that we reflect on what we're asking of our kids. Are the things you're asking of them age appropriate, developmentally appropriate? So, like the example sitting at a table, most 3-year-olds can't sit in place for an hour. Most 3-year-olds can barely sit in place for 15 minutes. It's nice that you want them to, but if you notice that every day at the end of 15 minutes of dinner, your child has eaten plenty, you're happy with how much he's eaten, and it's just, I want to get up, and you're like, no, sit down. Who's happy? Nobody's happy at that point. So really look at your expectations and ask yourself if what you're asking of the child is realistic. This one's a bit harder because you don't always know what's appropriate, especially if it's your first child or you haven't been around children a lot. Also because there's always kids who break the norm. Um, I've met 4-year-olds who can sit in one place all day. Great, and most kids can't do that. But if it's your niece and it's the first child you've ever been in contact with, it might set your bar a little high for expectations. So go online, ask other parents, go in parenting Facebook groups and ask. Or ask me, send me a message. I'd love to talk about this stuff. Is what you're asking your kids to do realistic? Um, Something that comes up quite often is, going to the stores. Hey, my kid doesn't listen when we're at the grocery store. If you're a 4-year-old in a giant store full of stimulants, first of all, colors and lights and sounds, but also full of treats. If you go to Maxi, it's not just the grocery store anymore. There's candy and toys and stationery and all sorts of things. Most 4-year-olds can't keep away from that temptation. Um, because, look at that stuff. It's hard as adults to keep away from, the delicious cookies on the shelf, right? So the expectation that you're going to go to the grocery store and have a grand old time while your child sits quietly in the cart is probably unrealistic. Yes, again, there are kids who can do it. Lots of kids who can do it, but it's still not a realistic expectation. So ask yourself, ask the internet, ask whoever, is this realistic? Then there's one last thing I want to talk about. And this is a tough one for people to get over. This is tough for educators to get over, and it's something I'm telling people all the time. Is your struggle worth it? Think back to when we were kids, think back to how we were raised, and have these ideas of what your kids are going to be like what your lives are going to be like. But ultimately, when you find yourself in a lot of struggles, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Example, because it's kind of controversial. When I bring my daycare kiddos out, to keep their coats or hats on, no matter how cold it is. I don't. Listen, if it was -30, I would insist they keep their stuff on because I don't want them to get frostbite. That's a real health thing. If it's -15, I don't ask them anymore. I don't even say anything. They want to take off their coat and stand in the cold, go ahead. And do neighbors walk by and complain? All the time. But you know what? Everybody is happier. Nobody's miserable because I'm not arguing. Put on your coat, put on your coat, put on your coat, put on your mittens. Most of them take off their coats and put them back on after 5 seconds. So I've taken out the struggle and we've still ended up where we are. Okay, so technical issues, but I'm back. Is it worth it? Yeah. So that struggle to me was not worth it. And you know what? Like I said, we're all happier now. Is it really a big deal if your kids mix the Play-Doh colors? Yes, I know some parents say, oh, well, I have OCD and it really bothers me. Number 1, it's not your Play-Doh. Number 2, nobody's dying. Number 3, it really isn't a big deal. So this is where that phrase comes in. Don't sweat the small stuff. Another example I have is a parent came in and I had asked all the parents and the kids to sign a big poster. One of the kids took a pen. So most of the kids are writing all over this thing. The parents are writing all over this thing. And one of the kids took a pen, made one mark, and the parent said right away, that's too big. And, you know, it's just not a big interaction. And probably I picked it out when most people wouldn't have. But was it really too big? Did it really make a difference? So one interaction like that, not a big deal. But if you are reflecting on your days and you find yourself micromanaging every little part of your kids' lives and you find yourself in constant power struggles with them, it's time to ask yourself if it's worth it. We have 3 rules at our daycare, which is when we generally will ask a kid to stop. And it's not my original rules. I was inspired by one of my idols, Bev Boz, who is a preschool educator somewhere in the States. She passed away. And she had 3 rules in her center. She would only interfere if the kids were hurting themselves, hurting others, or destroying property. Because she always asked, what was the point of a power struggle if they weren't hurting anybody? So in order to go back to the beginning where we talked about being happier and being less stress-free, sometimes we need to reflect on ourselves and ask ourselves if we're really causing the stress. Because does it really matter if your child wants to wear mismatched socks? In the childcare community, it would be called kind of dropping the ropes, you know, letting go of control. But what that does when you give your kids that more freedom and you stop sweating those small things is they will listen to you more when you have something serious to talk about. When they are launching themselves off the 5th stair onto a glass shelf, they will listen when you say, Liz, I let you do plenty of things, but you can't do this. Well, okay, maybe they won't listen, but they won't probably be as angry. They might not argue with you. The listening is a whole other impulse control thing. But they will be more willing to try and listen, let's put it that way. So, like I said, don't sweat the small stuff, because all of those tiny little power struggles that you have throughout the day can lead to one long, stressful day. So again, so what I challenge you, if you're watching this, is to try and step back and follow those 3 rules. Don't step in. Don't always interfere with your kids. Step back, and don't step in unless they're hurting themselves, hurting others, or breaking property. Because some of the things that we argue with the kids are really, when we're being honest with ourselves, just about controlling them. And like I said right at the beginning, if you want to control your kids and have perfectly obedient kids, then you are probably not going to be in the happiest, most comfortable environment. You'll probably be in a lot of high stress situations because you're going to spend all day going, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. So, this is quite a nice discussion so far. I just want to recap what we talked about. And in the meantime, I invite you, if you have any questions, to go ahead and type them in the chat now, because I'd love to actually have a discussion going. So again, we came here today to discuss external causes of behavior. Basically, what are the factors that can influence your kid's behavior that isn't within them? Because, again, we will get to that in the future. We will get to actual strategies, supporting kids' emotions, supporting their independence, supporting their problem solving. We'll get to all that later on. Right now, what can we do to make it easier on them and us by looking at all the external factors? So we started off with very, very basic needs. Are they hungry? Are they tired? Are they sick? Are they uncomfortable? Basically, very, very primal needs. Because, like we said, if someone's hungry, you're going to have a hard time bartering with them or getting them to do what you need. Next, the routine. This is where I asked you guys to take out a notebook, take out a journal, write down some notes. Keep track of your routine, where you're having the struggles, where you're having the arguments with your kids. Because if they're happening at the same time of your routine every day, your routine probably needs an overhaul. So take a look at all that. And then the last thing that I divided into 3 little sections was you. This is the hardest part. So keep a notebook, keep a journal, and reflect on yourselves. Reflect on your moods and behaviors, your triggers. When do you find yourself escalating? And how can you help yourself de-escalate before getting into that power struggle with your kid? How can you model the behaviors that you want to see just by talking to your kids? As well, under the little umbrella of reflecting on you, ask yourself, are the expectations you have for your children realistic? If not, then you probably need to step back and realize that they're not ready for whatever you're asking them to do or wanting you to do. And then lastly, we talked about just asking yourself, is this struggle worth it? Don't sweat the small stuff. If you find yourself arguing about a million little things in a day, stop it. Just let it be. Just take a deep breath and let your kids go to school with mismatched socks or a scarf cache-cou in the middle of summer, because really those kind of fights aren't worth it. You want to save your fights for brush your teeth because you have to. Not that I ever want you to fight, and we're going to hopefully get to a point in our life where we minimize those fights, but they're going to happen. So you want to save your authority for when you really need to. Important things. Getting out the door in the morning, brushing your teeth, putting on your pajamas, changing a diaper. But if you've already argued and argued and argued because the socks are wrong and the books are not in the right order or whatever it is, you've kind of lost that power. So, again, check out the kids' needs. Are they being met? Check out your routine. Is there parts of the routine that can be simplified, changed to help everybody out? And then reflect on yourself. Reflect on your practices, your expectations, and the battles you choose. So, that's it. That's everything I had to say. I didn't see any comments pop up so far. I'm doing this on something new, so I hope I don't miss anything. But I hope that everyone enjoyed this today. And we'll be back in about a month from now. And our next topic will be on why no punishments. A lot of parents say, but we need something. There needs to be a consequence. But I'm going to blow your mind and tell you there doesn't need to be a consequence. His kids are still learning. So we'll talk about that in about a month. I will post the exact date on our Facebook page because, once again, I forgot to check it in advance. And I will see you all in 1 month for our next live discussion. Have a nice evening.